The dust from the cattle drive still clung to Sarah Mitchell's skin as she watched Jake Coleman ride into town like he always did, shoulders squared and eyes fixed straight ahead, never once glancing toward the general store where she stood sweeping the wooden porch. It was the summer of 1882 in Redemption Creek, Texas, and Sarah had spent the better part of 5 years waiting for that man to see her as more than just the storekeeper's daughter who always had his supplies ready before he even asked. Jake swung down from his horse with the easy grace of a man who had spent more time in the saddle than on his own 2 feet. He was 26 now, weathered by sun and wind, his dark hair perpetually mussed beneath his worn Stetson. Sarah was 23, and she had loved him since the day he had arrived in town, a young ranch hand looking for work at the Double C Ranch just outside of town. He had walked into her father's store that first day, polite and soft-spoken, and something in his green eyes had captured her heart completely. "Afternoon, Miss Sarah," Jake said, tipping his hat as he climbed the steps. His voice was low and smooth, with just a hint of the Kentucky accent he had never quite lost. "Afternoon, Jake," she replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have your order ready inside, coffee, tobacco, and those leather straps you asked for." "You always know what I need before I do," he said with a small smile that made her heart flutter. If only that were true in ways that mattered, Sarah thought as she led him inside the dim interior of the store. Her father, Thomas Mitchell, was in the back room doing inventory, leaving them alone in the front. The shelves were stocked with everything from canned goods to farming equipment, the smell of leather and coffee beans mixing with the faint scent of the lavender soap her mother used to make before she passed 3 years ago. Jake paid for his supplies, his calloused fingers brushing against hers as he handed over the coins. The brief contact sent warmth shooting up her arm, and she wondered if he felt it too, but his expression remained neutral, friendly, but distant. "How is the ranch doing?" she asked, desperate to keep him there a moment longer. "Getting ready for the drive to Abilene next month," Jake replied, gathering his purchases. "Should be a good year if the weather holds." "You will be careful, won't you?" The words came out before she could stop them, revealing more concern than she intended. Something flickered in his eyes, a softness that was gone almost as quickly as it appeared. "Always am, Miss Sarah. You take care now." And then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft jingle of the bell, leaving Sarah alone with her longing and the familiar ache in her chest. She watched through the window as he loaded his supplies onto his horse and rode away back toward the ranch that consumed most of his waking hours. That evening, as Sarah helped her father close up the store, she tried to push thoughts of Jake from her mind. It was a futile effort. She had tried for 5 years to move on, to notice the other young men in town who had shown interest in her. There was Peter Lawson, the banker's son, who had asked her to the town dance twice. There was also Samuel Green, who worked at the livery stable and always went out of his way to greet her. Both were kind, respectable men, but neither of them made her heart race the way Jake did. "You're thinking about that Coleman boy again," her father said, not unkindly, as he locked the cash box. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. "Am I that obvious?" Thomas Mitchell was a practical man, weathered by years of frontier life and the loss of his beloved wife, but he loved his daughter fiercely. "Only to someone who knows you as well as I do. Sarah, I know it is not my place to tell you who to care for, but that young man has never given any indication that he is looking to settle down." "I know," Sarah said quietly, "but I cannot seem to help how I feel." Her father sighed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "The heart wants what it wants, I suppose. Just promise me you will not waste your whole life waiting for something that may never happen," Sarah promised, though she knew it was a promise she might not be able to keep. That night, lying in her bed in the small room above the store, she stared at the ceiling and wondered what it would take for Jake to see her, truly see her, as a woman he could love. The next few weeks passed in their usual rhythm. Jake came into town every few days for supplies or to pick up mail, and each time Sarah's heart would leap at the sight of him. They would exchange pleasantries, she would have his items ready, and he would leave. It was a dance they had been performing for years, and Sarah was growing weary of the steps. Then came the day that changed everything, though Sarah did not know it at the time. It was a scorching afternoon in late July when a group of rough-looking men rode into Redemption Creek. There were 5 of them, all armed, their faces hard and their eyes dangerous. Sarah was in the store when they dismounted in front of the saloon across the street, and something about them made her uneasy. Her father came to stand beside her at the window. "Trouble," he muttered. "Who are they?" Sarah asked. "Do not know, but I recognize the type. We should stay inside and keep our heads down." But trouble, as it often did in the Wild West, found them anyway. The men spent the afternoon drinking in the saloon, and by evening, they were causing a disturbance. The town's sheriff, an aging man named Bill Harper, tried to calm them down, but one of the men, a tall brute with a scar across his cheek, shoved the sheriff into the street. Sarah watched from the window as several townspeople came out to see what was happening. Her heart sank when she saw Jake among them. He must have been in town picking up supplies for the ranch and had gotten caught up in the commotion. "You boys need to move along," Jake said, his voice calm but firm as he helped Sheriff Harper to his feet. The scarred man laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the street. "And who is going to make us, Cowboy?" "I am asking nicely," Jake replied. "No need for this to get ugly." Sarah's hands gripped the windowsill as she watched the confrontation unfold. She knew Jake could handle himself. She had heard stories about his skill with a gun, though he rarely wore one in town, but 5 against 1 were bad odds, even for someone as capable as Jake. The situation might have escalated further if not for the arrival of 3 more ranch hands from the Double C drawn by the noise. With the odds more even, the strangers seemed to reconsider their position. The scarred man spat in the dirt and gestured to his companions. "This town is not worth our time anyway," he said, though his eyes promised that this was not over. They mounted their horses and rode out, leaving a wake of tension behind them. Sarah let out a breath she did not realize she had been holding. Her father placed a hand on her shoulder. "See? Everything worked out fine." But Sarah could not shake the feeling that those men would be back, and next time, the outcome might not be so peaceful. She was right. 3 days later, the strangers returned in the dead of night. Sarah was awakened by the sound of gunshots and breaking glass. She rushed to her window and saw flames rising from the saloon. Chaos erupted in the street as people ran from their homes, some trying to fight the fire, others seeking safety. Sarah threw on a dress and ran downstairs, her father close behind her. The heat from the fire was intense, and the smoke stung her eyes. In the confusion, she saw the 5 men on horseback riding through town and firing their guns in the air, laughing at the panic they had caused. Then Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. One of the men had grabbed young Emma Parker, the doctor's 10-year-old daughter, who had run into the street in confusion. The man was trying to pull her onto his horse, and Emma was screaming. Without thinking, Sarah ran toward them. "Let her go!" she shouted. The man turned his attention to Sarah, his eyes lighting up with cruel interest. Well, look what we have here. A pretty little thing with fire in her eyes." Sarah reached Emma and tried to pull her away, but the man was too strong. He grabbed Sarah's arm, his grip bruising. "I think you will be coming with us instead, darling." Panic seized Sarah as she struggled against him, but then a gunshot rang out, closer and sharper than the others. The man released her with a curse, blood blooming on his shoulder. Sarah stumbled back and saw Jake standing in the street, his revolver drawn, his face a mask of cold fury. "Let them go," Jake said, his voice deadly calm. The wounded man cursed again but released his grip entirely. His companions, seeing that the townspeople were now armed and fighting back, decided to cut their losses. They rode out of town in a thunder of hoofbeats, the wounded man clutching his shoulder and casting a venomous look back at Jake. The townspeople managed to put out the fire before it spread beyond the saloon, though the building itself was a total loss. In the aftermath, as people checked on one another and assessed the damage, Jake made his way to Sarah. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her for injuries. Sarah shook her head, though she was trembling. I am fine, thanks to you. Jake, you saved us. I could not let them hurt you, he said, and for a moment Sarah saw something in his eyes that looked like more than just concern for a fellow townsperson, but then he seemed to catch himself and stepped back. You should get inside. It is not safe out here. Sarah wanted to say more, to ask him why he looked at her like that, but her father was calling for her, and the moment passed. Jake tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Sarah with more questions than answers. The next morning, Sheriff Harper organized a meeting in front of the burned saloon. Nearly everyone in town gathered to discuss what should be done about the outlaws. Jake was there, along with several other ranch hands and able-bodied men. Those men need to be brought to justice, Mars, the sheriff said. I will be forming a posse to track them down. I need volunteers. Jake was the first to step forward. I will go. Several other men volunteered as well, including 2 more hands from the Double C Ranch. Sarah listened to the plans being made, her stomach twisting with worry. She knew Jake could take care of himself, but the thought of him riding into danger made her feel sick. As the crowd dispersed, Sarah approached Jake. Please be careful, she said. He looked at her, and she saw the conflict in his eyes. Sarah, He stopped, seeming to struggle with what he wanted to say. I will come back, I promise. Why? The word escaped before Sarah could stop it. Why do you always do this, Jake? You act like you care, but then you pull away. I have been waiting for 5 years for you to see me, truly see me, and I do not know how much longer I can keep doing this. Jake's expression was pained. Sarah, it is not that simple. Then explain it to me, she said, her voice breaking. Because from where I stand, it seems like you feel something too, but you're too afraid to admit it. Jake removed his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration she had seen before. You are right, he said finally. I am afraid. Sarah, I am just a ranch hand. I do not have anything to offer you. You deserve someone who can give you a real home, security, a future. Not someone who lives in a bunkhouse and spends half his life on cattle drives. Sarah's heart ached at his words. Do you really think those things matter to me? Jake, I do not care about any of that. I care about you. And that is exactly why I have kept my distance, Jake said, his voice rough with emotion. Because I knew if I let myself get close to you, I would not be able to walk away. But you deserve better than what I can give you. Let me decide what I deserve, Sarah said, stepping closer to him. Jake, I have loved you for 5 years. 5 years of hoping, of waiting, of watching you ride into town and praying that maybe this time you would stay. If you feel nothing for me, then tell me now and I will let you go. But if there is even a chance that you feel the same way, then please do not push me away. Jake stared at her, and Sarah could see the war raging behind his eyes. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. Of course I feel the same way. I have felt the same way since the day I met you, Sarah, but... No buts, Sarah interrupted. Just promise me you will come back, and when you do, we will figure out the rest together. Jake was quiet for a long moment, then he nodded. I promise. The posse left that afternoon, 7 men on horseback riding out of Redemption Creek in pursuit of the outlaws. Sarah watched them go, her hand pressed to her heart, Jake's promise echoing in her mind. The days that followed were some of the longest of Sarah's life. She threw herself into work at the store, helping her father and trying to keep busy, but her thoughts were always with Jake. At night, she would lie awake imagining all the terrible things that could happen, and then she would force herself to remember his promise. He said he would come back, and she had to believe him. A week passed, then 10 days. The town was on edge, everyone waiting for news. Then, on the 11th day, a rider came into town with word that the posse had caught up with the outlaws 2 days' ride to the south. There had been a shootout, and all 5 outlaws were either dead or in custody. The posse was on their way back. Relief flooded through Sarah, but it was tempered by worry. The writer had not given details about whether anyone from the posse had been injured. She would not be able to rest easy until she saw Jake with her own eyes. The next afternoon, the posse rode back into Redemption Creek. Sarah was in the store when she heard the shouts and cheers from the street. She ran outside, her heart pounding, and saw the 7 men riding in. Her eyes scanned them frantically until she found Jake. He was dusty and tired, with a bandage wrapped around his left forearm. But he was alive. Their eyes met across the street, and Jake smiled, a real, genuine smile that lit up his face. Sarah wanted to run to him, but she forced herself to wait as the townspeople gathered around the returning men, congratulating them and asking questions. Finally, as the crowd began to disperse, Jake made his way to her. "Hello, Sarah," he said. "You are hurt," she said, looking at his bandaged arm. "Just a graze," he assured her. "It looks worse than it is." Sarah wanted to throw her arms around him, but they were still in the middle of the street with people watching. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Somewhere private?" Jake nodded. "Let me take care of my horse, and then we can go for a walk." Half an hour later, they were walking along the creek that gave the town its name, the water flowing lazily in the summer heat. They walked in silence for a while, the tension between them palpable. Finally, Jake spoke. "I did a lot of thinking while I was gone," he said, "about what you said before I left, about us." Sarah's heart was in her throat. "And?" Jake stopped walking and turned to face her. "I realized that I have been a fool. I have spent 5 years telling myself that I was not good enough for you, that I did not have enough to offer. But the truth is, I was just scared. Scared of failing you, scared of not being able to give you the life you deserve." "Jake," Sarah began, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "When that man grabbed you, when I saw you in danger, I realized that none of those fears mattered. All that mattered was keeping you safe, being there for you. And then when I was out there tracking those outlaws, all I could think about was getting back to you. Not because I promised I would, but because I needed to see you again. I needed to tell you the truth." "What truth?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Jake took a deep breath. "That I love you, Sarah. I have loved you for 5 years, and I'm done fighting it. I know I'm just a ranch hand, and I do not have much to offer, but if you will have me, I promise to spend every day trying to make you happy." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but they were tears of joy. "Jake Coleman, I have been waiting 5 years to hear you say those words." "I am sorry I made you wait so long," he said, taking her hands in his, "but I am here now, and I am not going anywhere." Sarah laughed, a sound of pure happiness, and then Jake was pulling her into his arms, and they were kissing finally after 5 long years of waiting and wanting. The kiss was everything Sarah had dreamed it would be and more, filled with all the pent-up emotion and longing they had both been carrying. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Jake rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said again, as if he could not say it enough. "I love you too," Sarah replied, her heart so full she thought it might burst. They stood there by the creek, wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah knew that this was just the beginning of their story. There would be challenges ahead, she was sure of that, but they would face them together. Over the next few weeks, Jake began courting Sarah properly. He would come into town whenever he could spare the time, bringing her wildflowers he picked on the range and taking her for walks or picnics by the creek. The whole town noticed the change, and there was much speculation and gossip, most of it good-natured. Thomas Mitchell, who had watched his daughter pine for Jake for years, gave his blessing readily. "I always knew that boy had sense in him," he said. "He just needed time to figure it out." Jake also began making changes in his life. He approached the owner of the Double C Ranch, a gruff but fair man named Charles Calloway, and asked about the possibility of taking on more responsibility and eventually buying his own piece of land. Calloway, who had always valued Jake's hard work and dedication, agreed to help him save toward that goal. "You are one of the best hands I have ever had," Calloway told him. "If you are ready to settle down and start building something for yourself, I will support that." Summer turned to fall, and Jake went on the cattle drive to Abilene as planned. It was agony for Sarah to watch him leave, but this time was different. This time he kissed her goodbye in front of the whole town and promised to return as soon as he could. And this time Sarah knew with absolute certainty that he would. The drive took 6 weeks, and when Jake returned in late October, he had money saved and a plan. He met with Sarah and her father at the store and laid out his proposal. "I have been talking to Charles Calloway," Jake said. "He is willing to sell me 200 acres on the eastern edge of his property. It is good land with water and grazing. I have enough saved for a down payment and I can pay off the rest over the next few years. I want to build a house there, Sarah, a home, our home, if you will marry me." Sarah could barely breathe. "Are you asking me to marry you, Jake Coleman?" Jake got down on one knee right there in the store, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. "Sarah Mitchell, I love you more than I ever thought possible. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Sarah said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." Jake slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her into a kiss that made her forget everything else. Her father cleared his throat awkwardly, and they broke apart, both laughing. They were married in early December in a simple ceremony at the small church in Redemption Creek. The whole town turned out for the wedding, and Sarah had never felt more loved or more happy. She wore her mother's wedding dress, which her father had saved all these years, and Jake wore a new suit that he had purchased specially for the occasion. As they exchanged vows, Sarah looked into Jake's eyes and saw her entire future reflected there. It had taken 5 years of waiting, of hoping, of believing that someday he would let himself love her, but it had all been worth it for this moment. After the wedding, they moved into a small cabin on Jake's new land while he began building their permanent home. It was hard work, made harder by the cold winter, but Jake was determined, and Sarah worked alongside him whenever she could. Her father had hired help for the store so that she could focus on her new life, though she still helped out when needed. The house began to take shape slowly but surely. Jake worked on it every spare moment he had, and several of the ranch hands from the Double C came to help on their days off. By spring, the frame was up, and by summer, they had walls and a roof. Sarah spent her days making the cabin cozy and planning how she would decorate their new home. One evening in late August, nearly a year after Jake had first confessed his love, they took a break from their work and sat on the porch of the cabin watching the sun set over their land. Sarah was tucked against Jake's side, his arm around her shoulders, and she felt utterly content. "Do you remember that night by the creek?" Sarah asked, "just when you told me you loved me for the first time?" "I remember every moment of that day," Jake said. "I remember thinking that I was the luckiest man alive." "I had been waiting so long to hear those words," Sarah said softly. 5 years, Jake. Sometimes I wondered if I was crazy for holding on to hope for so long." Jake pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I am sorry I made you wait. If I could go back and do it differently, I would, Inter." "I would not change a thing," Sarah said, "because everything we went through led us here, to this moment, and I would not trade this for anything in the world." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. The full moon rose over the horizon, bright and luminous, casting a silver glow over everything. "The moon was full that night too," Jake said suddenly, "the night we talked before I left with the posse. I remember looking up at it and thinking that no matter what happened, no matter how far I went, we were both under the same sky, looking at the same moon." Sarah turned to look at him, seeing the emotion in his eyes. "You never told me that." "There are a lot of things I never told you," Jake said. "Things I felt but was too afraid to say. But I do not want to hold back anymore, Sarah. I want you to know everything." "Tell me," Sarah urged gently. Jake took a deep breath. "That first day I walked into your father's store 5.5 years ago, I saw you, and something in my chest just shifted. You were arranging canned goods on a shelf, and you turned and smiled at me, and I swear, Sarah, I had never seen anything more beautiful in my entire life. I knew right then that I was in trouble. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Why did you never say anything? Because I was a nobody, Jake said, a drifter looking for work. I did not even know if I would be staying in Redemption Creek, and you were this bright, wonderful woman who deserved the world. I told myself that the best thing I could do for you was stay away. But then days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and I could not leave. I stayed in this town for you, Sarah. I took that job at the Double C and worked harder than I ever had in my life, hoping that maybe someday I could be someone worthy of you. Jake, you were always worthy, Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. You just could not see it. I see it now, Jake said, cupping her face in his hands, because you made me see it. You never gave up on me, even when I had given up on myself. And I promise you, Sarah, I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. I could never regret it, Sarah whispered. You are everything I ever wanted. They kissed under the full moon, the same moon that had witnessed so many moments in their journey together. And Sarah knew that there would be many more moments like this, many more moonlit nights spent in the arms of the man she loved. The house was finished by autumn, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and large windows that let in plenty of light. Sarah had never been prouder of anything in her life. Jake had built it with his own 2 hands, a testament to his determination and his love for her. They moved in on a crisp October day, carrying their few possessions from the cabin. That night, they lay in their new bed in their new bedroom, listening to the sounds of the prairie outside their window. This is ours, Sarah said, wonder in her voice. Our home. Our home, Jake agreed, pulling her close. The first of many dreams we will build together. As winter approached, they settled into their life together. Jake continued to work at the Double C while also tending to his own small herd of cattle. Sarah helped her father at the store a few days a week and spent the rest of her time making their house a home, sewing curtains, braiding rugs, and tending to a small garden. In January of 1884, Sarah discovered she was pregnant. She told Jake one evening after dinner, nervous and excited all at once. Jake's face lit up with such pure joy that Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of awe. "We are going to have a baby," Sarah confirmed, laughing as Jake swept her into his arms and spun her around. "I love you so much," he said, setting her down gently and placing a hand on her still flat stomach. "Both of you?" The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Sarah tired more quickly than usual. Jake was attentive and protective, always making sure she did not overdo it. Her father was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandfather, and the whole town seemed excited for the young couple. In early September of 1884, Sarah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas Jacob Coleman, after both his grandfathers. Jake held his son for the first time with tears streaming down his face, and Sarah fell in love with him all over again, watching him cradle their child with such tenderness. "He is perfect," Jake whispered, his finger tracing the baby's tiny hand. "He is ours," Sarah said, her heart overflowing with love. Life settled into a new rhythm with the baby. Sarah's father doted on his grandson, and Jake proved to be a devoted father, always eager to help with Thomas despite his long days of work. The little family thrived, their home filled with laughter and love. 2 years later, Sarah gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Grace Elizabeth. And 2 years after that, another son whom they called William. Their house, which had once seemed so spacious, now rang with the sounds of children playing and growing. Jake's ranch continued to prosper. He had paid off his land within 5 years and had expanded his herd significantly. He was known throughout the area as a fair and hard-working rancher, and their family was respected in the community. One evening in the summer of 1890, when Thomas was nearly 6, Grace was 4, and William was 2, Sarah and Jake sat on their porch watching their children play in the yard. It had been 8 years since Jake had first told Sarah he loved her, and their life together had been everything she had dreamed of and more. "Do you ever think about that night?" Sarah asked, leaning against Jake's shoulder. The night you finally told me you loved me? Jake smiled, his arm tightening around her. All the time. It was the night my real life began. Mine too, Sarah said. I had waited so long to hear those words. 5 years of hoping and praying that you would see what was right in front of you. I was a fool, Jake said, shaking his head. I wasted so much time being afraid. But we made it here, Sarah said, gesturing to their children, their home, their life. And it was worth every moment of waiting. Jake turned to look at her, his green eyes filled with the same love she had seen that night so many years ago. I love you, Sarah Coleman. I loved you then. I love you now. And I will love you until my last breath. And I love you, Sarah replied, kissing him softly. Always and forever. As the sun set over their land and the full moon began to rise, just as it had on so many significant nights in their lives, Sarah felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. She had waited 5 years to hear Jake say he loved her, and in the years since he had shown her that love in countless ways. They had built a life together, a family, a home. They had faced challenges and celebrated triumphs, and through it all their love had only grown stronger. The children ran up to the porch, demanding their parents' attention, and the moment of quiet reflection passed. But as Sarah stood to gather William into her arms while Jake scooped up Grace and Thomas clamored for a story, she caught her husband's eye and saw her own happiness reflected there. This was their happily ever after, hard-won and deeply cherished. It had started with a confession under a full moon, with words Sarah had waited years to hear, and it had blossomed into a love story that would last a lifetime. As the Coleman family headed inside for the evening, their laughter echoing through the house Jake had built with his own hands, Sarah knew that every moment of waiting, every tear shed, every hope held had been worth it for this beautiful life they had created together. Years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved working the ranch alongside his father. Grace inherited her mother's warm heart and her father's determination, always ready to help wherever she was needed. William, the youngest, was curious and adventurous, keeping his parents on their toes with his endless energy. Sarah's father, Thomas Mitchell, remained a vital part of their lives until he passed peacefully in his sleep in 1895. His death was a blow to the family, but they took comfort in knowing he had lived to see his daughter happily married and his grandchildren thriving. He left the store to Sarah, and she and Jake decided to keep it running, hiring a manager while Sarah oversaw the business side of things. Jake's ranch became one of the most successful in the area, known for quality cattle and honest dealing. He never forgot where he came from or the years he spent as a simple ranch hand, and he treated his own employees with the same fairness and respect he had once hoped for himself. In 1898, when their eldest son Thomas was 14, he asked his parents how they had fallen in love. It was a warm summer evening, and the family was gathered on the porch after dinner watching the stars come out. Sarah and Jake exchanged a look, smiling at the memory. "Your father was stubborn," Sarah said, her eyes twinkling with affection. "Your mother was patient," Jake added, taking her hand. "I waited 5 years for him to admit he loved me," Sarah told their children. 5 long years of hoping and believing that someday he would see what was right in front of him. "Why did it take so long, Pa?" Grace asked, her young face confused. Jake considered the question carefully. "Because I was afraid, sweetheart. I thought I was not good enough for your mother. I thought she deserved someone better than a ranch hand with nothing to his name." "But Mama did not care about that, did she?" Thomas said, understanding dawning on his face. "No, I did not," Sarah confirmed. "I cared about your father, about the man he was and the man I knew he could become, and I was willing to wait as long as it took for him to realize that he was worthy of love." "And when did you realize it, Pa?" William asked. Jake's expression grew serious. "When some bad men came to town and threatened your mother. In that moment, I knew that nothing else mattered except keeping her safe and being there for her. I realized that my fears were holding us both back from the happiness we deserved. "So what did you do?" Grace asked, leaning forward. "I told her the truth," Jake said simply. "Under a full moon with my heart in my throat, I told your mother that I loved her, and she told me she had been waiting years to hear those words." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the memory. It was the most beautiful night of my life, up until that point, and it was the beginning of everything we have now. "The beginning of us," Thomas said, gesturing to himself and his siblings. "Exactly," Jake said, pulling Sarah close. "The beginning of our family, our home, our life together, all because I finally found the courage to say what I had been feeling for years." The children were quiet for a moment, absorbing the story. Then Grace spoke up. "I want a love like yours someday, Mama, someone who will wait for me and believe in me." "And I hope you find it, sweetheart," Sarah said. "But remember, the best love is the one where both people choose each other every single day. Your father and I did not just fall in love once. We fall in love over and over again with every challenge we face and every joy we share." Jake nodded in agreement. Love is not just about the big moments, like confessions under the moon. It is about all the small moments in between. It is about working side by side, supporting each other's dreams, and choosing to stay together even when things get hard. "Has it been hard sometimes?" William asked. "Of course," Sarah said honestly. "There have been droughts and harsh winters, times when money was tight and we had to make difficult decisions, but we faced all of it together, and that made all the difference." "Your mother is the strongest person I know," Jake said, his voice filled with pride. "She has been my partner in every sense of the word. This ranch, this family, everything we have built, it would not exist without her." Sarah felt her cheeks flush with pleasure at his words. Even after all these years, Jake still had the power to make her heart flutter. "And I could not have asked for a better partner," she said. "Your father is a man of his word. When he promised to make me happy, he meant it, and he has kept that promise every single day since." The full moon rose over the horizon, casting its familiar silver glow over the ranch. Sarah looked up at it and felt a rush of memories. The night Jake had first said he loved her by the creek, the night he had proposed, countless other nights when they had sat together under its light, planning their future and dreaming their dreams. "Look," Grace said softly, "it is a full moon tonight." "It is," Jake said, his eyes meeting Sarah's. "Just like the night I told your mother I loved her for the first time." "Tell us about that night," Thomas urged. "Every detail." So Sarah and Jake took turns recounting the story. From the tense days before Jake left with the posse to the emotional conversation by the creek when he had finally confessed his feelings. They told their children about the fear and the hope, the years of waiting and the joy of finally being together. They painted a picture of that moonlit night when everything had changed, when Jake Coleman had finally said the words Sarah Mitchell had been waiting 5 years to hear. As the story came to an end, Sarah looked around at her family, her strong, handsome husband, her 3 beautiful children, the home they had built together, and felt overwhelming gratitude for the life they had created. It had started with patience and hope, with a love that refused to die even when circumstances seemed impossible, and it had grown into something more wonderful than she could have ever imagined. "I love you," Jake said softly, just for her ears, as the children began to talk among themselves. Sarah smiled, the same words she had heard countless times, but that never lost their power. "I love you too, and I would wait 5 years all over again if it meant ending up right here, right now, with you and our children." "You will never have to wait again," Jake promised, kissing her gently, "because I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know how much I love you every single day." And he did. As the years continued to pass, as their children grew up and started families of their own, as Sarah and Jake grew older together, that love remained constant. It was there in the way Jake still brought her wildflowers from the range, in the way Sarah still made sure his favorite coffee was ready in the morning, It was there in the gentle touches, the shared glances, the quiet moments when words were not necessary because their hearts spoke the same language. By 1910, they were grandparents several times over, their house often filled with the laughter of grandchildren. Sarah was 51 now, her dark hair streaked with silver, but Jake still looked at her the way he had that night by the creek in 1882, when he had finally let his walls down and admitted what his heart had known all along. One evening in late summer, they found themselves alone on the porch, the grandchildren having been taken home by their parents, the house quiet for the first time in days. The full moon was rising again as it had so many times throughout their life together. 28 years, Sarah said, resting her head on Jake's shoulder. 28 years since you told me you loved me under a moon just like this one. Best decision I ever made, Jake said, his arm around her as solid and sure as ever. Finally admitting what I felt. Finally letting myself believe that I deserved you. We deserved each other, Sarah corrected gently. And look at what we built together, Jake. 3 children, 7 grandchildren, a successful ranch, a life full of love and meaning. All because I waited, and you found your courage. Jake turned to face her, his weathered hands cupping her face with the same tenderness he had shown that first time they kissed. I love you, Sarah Coleman. I have loved you from the moment I walked into your father's store 30 years ago, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Sarah replied, her eyes shining with tears of joy. Thank you for making me wait 5 years, because when you finally said those words, when you finally let yourself love me openly, it was worth every single moment of hoping and believing. They kissed under the full moon, just as they had so many times before. 2 souls who had found each other against the odds and built a love that would last a lifetime. The Wild West might have been taming, the frontier might have been closing, but their love remained as wild and free and powerful as it had been in those early days. As they sat together in the moonlight, Sarah thought about the young woman she had been, sweeping the porch of her father's store and dreaming of the handsome cowboy who never seemed to notice her. She thought about the years of patience, the moments of doubt, the unwavering hope that had sustained her. And she thought about that perfect night when Jake Coleman had finally confessed his love under the full moon, saying the words she had been waiting years to hear. It had been the beginning of their story, but it was far from the end. Their story continued in every sunrise they watched together, every challenge they overcame, every joy they shared. It continued in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy of love they had created, and it would continue for as long as the moon rose over the Texas prairie, a testament to the power of patience, hope, and a love that refused to give up. I love you, Jake whispered one more time. And I will never tire of hearing you say it, Sarah replied, her heart as full at 51 as it had been at 23. Under the light of the full moon, surrounded by the life they had built together, Sarah and Jake Coleman sat hand in hand, grateful for every moment, every memory, and every tomorrow they would face together. Their love story, which had begun with a confession that took 5 years to speak, would last forever, written in the stars and sealed with every moonlit kiss they shared.